For those who don't know me, I'm not a Norwegian, I'm a proper Swede, and I've had a part-time position in Sweden for until 5 years ago. Last employment was at the Swedish National Police Board, so I'm pretty knowledgeable about the Swedish situation. When I was asked to come here, I started to think of an issue and how to deal with this. And then I read this article in our largest daily newspaper. And of course, the police set high hopes. And so they must have strong belief in the value of CCTV and what it can accomplish. And my natural thought was, okay, what can we learn from research evidence? So I'm going to talk about my own experiences of evaluating CCTV, Swedish experiences, Swedish evaluations, what do we know from systematic reviews, and then the current police view, and some concluding reflections. So Oslo, a couple of, let's see, 15 years ago, a group of Norwegian police officers went to UK, and they were very impressed by what they saw, these fantastic CCTV system, and they also wanted one. But we do have concern with integrity issues. So the Department of Justice required that an evaluation should be carried out. And I was in charge of the research unit, so I ended up in my knee. And I had to work very fast because they wanted to immediately put this into work. And my first problem was to find a researcher, because Norwegian criminologists, they are not in favor of positivistic research. So I had to go to another university, another city to find a researcher. I ended up with a really good one, a political scientist. And then the next thing was I had no money, but I had a very good rapport with the police commissioner of Oslo. So she said, just send the bills. So that was pretty good. And then we started negotiations and discussions and ended up with an idea to conduct an impact evaluation with focus on effects of crime and feelings of safety. And this is Oslo, center of Oslo, and that's a central railway station. And on a daily basis, there are about 70,000 persons who move back and forth. It's a communications hub with railways, subway, buses, and trams. And the system that they put into effect had 6 cameras, and they had a link to the Oslo dispatch center, and they had a center in the Oslo central station where they monitored the cameras. And when we decided to the design of the study, we have, of course, the experimental area. Then we found out that some places in this area was covered by the cameras. So we defined them as displacement areas. Maybe they could go there because they were not detected, the criminals, the offenders. And then we found another area with about the same use as that outside of the central railway station. So that is a control area. And this is the design that Welch and Farrington claims is the ideal one if you can't do an RCT. So that's it. And then we decided to make 3 sub-studies with a pre- and post-evaluation design. So we had structured interviews with shopkeepers in the area. I knew from another study that shopkeepers, they have very good, they know what happens in the area, because they often stand in the windows, they talk to their neighbors, etc., etc. And they spend most of the day in this area, so they are very knowledgeable. So we decided to make structured interviews, but that was, of course, only in the experimental area. Then we did time series analysis of police incident log data, and we also tried to see what we could accomplish with crimes reported to the police. And to sum up, there was a drug scene outside of the central railway station, so there were lots of more incidents of drug peddling that was detected. We also found that little fewer cases of disturbances was reported by the public, but on the other hand, more was reported by the police in the log. We had an indication of a reduction of robbery, theft from person, for instance, purse snatching, and also bicycle thefts. No signs of crime displacement. And the shopkeepers, there was no perception of change in the situation as regards to criminality, but some indications of improvement of the perception of social order. All of them had positive attitudes towards CCTV surveillance, but the most strong result we got was that they still believed in the effectiveness of CCTV, but not as firm as before. So that's a summary of results. Then we go into the more interesting aspect, which is, well, of course, that's main conclusion. We couldn't find the strong effects that the police assumed. They were convinced that this would happen when they introduced, because they were impressed by what the British police had said. So now, what happened? Well, Oslo police did not accept the result, and they continued with CCTV surveillance. And then another rather funny thing happened, because they needed permission. So the National Police Directorate said that, okay, you can continue, but there must be a new evaluation. But they didn't inform me. So 2 years later, I got a visit from the Oslo Police Department, where they asked about the new evaluation. And I said, what evaluation? Because they hadn't informed me that it was a requirement. So we had a discussion, and I said, well, you were not pleased with the last evaluation. What do you want me to evaluate this time? What do you expect will happen? And they didn't have a clue. So I said, okay, go back to police headquarters and try to figure out what you want to be evaluated, and then we can see what we can do. As soon as they left the room, I tried to get in touch with the saint protecting researchers in charge and said, please let this go away. And that happened because it sort of just evaporated in thin air. So there was no new evaluation conducted. And I met the guy who was in charge of the CCTV operation a couple of years ago. So I asked him what happened. And he said, well, after a couple of years, someone came from police headquarters and pulled the plug out of the and closed down the system. So that's what's happened. Okay. Then I talked to the National Police Director and asked her, what's the use with this type of research if you don't follow the advice or act upon them? And then she said that, well, there were lots of applications from other cities, but when they read report, they withdrew those applications. So maybe we had some consequence and effect of this particular evaluation. Okay, then to go to Sweden. The Swedish National Council for Crime Prevention has published 6 reports The first one was from 2003, where they made an evaluation in southern part of Sweden, and with somewhat mixed results. I won't go into details. It's from 2 entertainment areas in Stockholm, Stureplan and Medborgarplatsen, with 7, respectively 9 cameras. And the aim, stated by the police, was to prevent crimes, increase feelings of safety, and increase clear-ups. And in order for them to implement the system, the authorities required an evaluation. And so they got a permission for 3 years, and then the National Council for Crime Prevention had to do an evaluation of what occurred. And CCTV were active in nighttime, and they had an active monitoring at dispatch centers during weekend nights. So that's the most sophisticated so far we've had in Sweden. Crimes decreased in the targeted crimes decreased in the surveyed areas, but also in the 7 control areas. And the interpretation was that this is part of the general crime drop we have seen in many other countries. And so the conclusion was no effect as to crime. And then we think that this is an area with high criminality, and in relative terms it is. But when you talk about absolute numbers, not that many crimes to prevent. As to the feelings of safety, most people didn't know that there was a CCTV scheme, even though there were signs, and but they believed that CCTV is effective. And the police had positive views on CCTV, and they could give examples of incidents where it had been effective. And then what about clear-ups? I have used a table in the report to try to show. And this is the contribution, because of these about 560 crimes, there are some that in all likelihood were solved, cleared up on the spot, so to speak. So there is no need at all to use CCTV footage. So actually, this is the contribution from the CCTV cameras. And in 80% of the cases, they didn't require, they didn't use it. They requested but didn't examine 6% of the crimes. Examined, not used in 10%, and in many instances it was because of the bad quality. Too dark, couldn't identify what's going on, etc., etc. Useful, no prosecution. Actually, that could be cases where it's clear from the footage that this is an act of self-defense and not a crime. So in my mind, maybe some of these are clear-ups or should be considered as clear-ups. Then we have decision to prosecute in 2%. But the researcher who checked all this data and the verdicts, he said that in about 1% of the cases, footage was decisive. Without it, you couldn't have found the perpetrator guilty. So not much of a contribution. And also, in one of the first studies, the National Council for Crime Prevention pointed out that, well, there is probably a great potential. You must improve your act. You must be better. So this is after what the National Council for Crime Prevention stated in one of the first reports. What about the systematic reviews? This is the Welch and Farrington, where they use only studies with strong designs. You need, there are no RCTs, but you need a control area and all that stuff. And one of the conclusion is that CCTV has a modest but significant desirable effect on crime. Is most effective in reducing crime in car parks. That's one of the main conclusions. But when you go into the tables and to try to figure out what that rests on, table 7 is where I've just put the head and then the last row in these examples. So all the 20 studies on city and town centers, there is no significant contribution, no effect from CCTV. But from the car parks, I think that 5 of them showed pretty strong results, pretty strong effects of CCTV in reducing crimes. So this main conclusion rests on 5 car parks, to put it a little pointedly. Then I must say I'm pretty critical towards the Campbell collaboration type of evaluations. But now there is a new, more evolved concept that has been developed at University College London. And they call it the Emmy concept. Instead of just focusing on effects found, they also systematically check in the studies whether they have identified the mechanism that is supposed to give the expected effects, the conditions needed to activate, actually it's the context. And then the implementation, what type of systems, was it monitored or not? And then economy. So that gives the decision makers, the practitioners, much more interesting information if you're going to decide whether to have a system or not. So yeah, it can reduce crime. And they found significant reductions in vehicle crime and property crime, but nothing as to violent crime. How does it work? And it can work directly through the increased actual risk or the subjective risk. But the main conclusion is none of these potential mechanisms are empirically tested. So there is a lack of knowledge here. Moderators, and I think this is the most important part. There is good evidence that CCTV effectiveness varies considerably by context. And if you just start to think a little about the differences between a parking space and a city center, it doesn't take long before you realize that there are so huge differences in structure, physical structure, the usage, the types of crimes, etc., etc. And of course, are we talking about early systems with just black and white, with old type of TV sets, or are we talking about high tech with the face recognition and all there is? Huge difference. And if you don't take that into account, what do you end up with? And no information about cost. It is expensive. Then last week I got in touch with the officer in charge of CCTV at the National Operative Unit. And his task is to develop the national concept. And I explained that I'm going to a conference, I'm going to talk about this, and I've read this article in Dagens Nyheter, your name was mentioned, I want to ask you some questions. These is his answers. Well, CCTV works better than research indicates. But he hadn't read the last report. It's about 35 pages thick, but he didn't know of it. He knew of it, but hadn't read it. Okay. And we researchers, we have a too narrow focus on preventive effects. Okay. And we have also evaluated an immature technique. There has been a tremendous development as to what CCTV can accomplish on the systems. Okay. And he said that this is useful for operative purposes, documenting occurrences, but didn't go into detail. This now he was a little self-critical, because he said that the police are operative, they are doers, but to develop tedious tasks, to carry out tedious tasks like developing procedures and routines, that's not what they like to do. And as for himself, he had continually checked systems for footage. And so he built his opinion about the effectiveness on anecdotes, in principle. He had an anecdotal approach, which is not uncommon among practitioners. Then I asked about these areas, 3 suburbs. We do have problems with gang shootings, drug markets, etc. You name it, they've got it. And he said that, well, they didn't use that to develop the systems he said was lacking. No, it was dedicated officers who sort of found this interesting and who tried to figure out what to do and to use it. And with what consequences, we don't know. No firm plans for evaluations. They had talked with 2 universities, but no plans. And he said that they intended to go for full-scale implementation instead of using these as trials to figure out what can be accomplished and how to do it. So that's what he was doing. And he was displeased with the proposal for a new legislation. In essence, that the police can implement the system and use it for 1 month. Then they must apply for a permission. And that was far too restrictive. Then, so he situated in the upper police bureaucracy. And I have some experiences from that. In 2009, the government required that the police should establish an evaluation unit. And among the things they were supposed to accomplish was to find out what works and for the police to become a learning organization. So that's a buzzword, learning organization, evidence-based. And this ran beautifully for 6 months, but then the police board deserted what they had stated to the government. And last week I also made a phone call to one who maybe still is employed as in the former evaluation unit. And it became a headache, the remnants of the evaluation unit, and it ended up in a unit run by police, proper police. So now they, of course, are in charge of this and have full control. And when I asked her, but are you still doing evaluations? She really didn't know. So maybe it's non-existence, this evaluation unit. And we are talking about ultimately a requirement by the government. So that's interesting. And even more interesting is that the Swedish police invest in evidence-based policing. There are a lot of middle-rank leaders who are sent to Cambridge to take part of the Larry Sherman version of evidence-based policing. But you can't see any trace whatsoever in the discussions I've had. So to sum up, what about CCTV? I think it's an easy sell. We do have, for instance, the terror attack, where the pictures that I show is from the subway, and they were almost immediately made available. And they arrested the perpetrator just a couple of hours after the incident. And then we had a debate about sexual assaults during pop rock festivals around the country. And it was a big issue last year. And then they said that they used CCTV, and now it's not a problem any longer, not to the same extent in any case. And these incidents are used by the police when they sort of explain, this is what we invest in, we need this national plan. And we also have the security industry who is lobbying. Of course, they want to sell this. It's a company in Lund who I think they're world leading and sell a lot of systems. So to finally stop. So my worry is another 25 million Swedish crowns down the drain. So that's it.
Questions?
I've worked with stations for many years, and I'm an architect. I'm not a police officer, and I've always worried about the design and how you interpret the space more than the CCTV cameras. Mm. And when I worked for the Danish railway system at designing stations, it was safety at stations. I always told them, try not to what is the effect of the cameras? And I have exactly the same experience as you. It wasn't defined where they had their data from. And it is also, unfortunately, it is my impression that because it's very sectoral in Denmark, the transport company does not cooperate with the local society. They're like a satellite disk down from the sky, and then 100 meters around, that's the Danish railway station, and the rest could be Nevada, desert, or it doesn't matter. So they only want to focus what's on the station. Mm-hmm. And since there's only people employed in this company that know something about trains, then the minute they had me indoors, I was pretty fast out again, because they were like, oh my God, that's the woman who talks about society and she talks about fear, and we can't handle this. We have a wonderful cooperation with the police, so let's put up the cameras. And then I went to the police and I said, how much do you actually use this footage? What are you actually looking for? And they said, it's a closed circuit, so you could be killed and stabbed to death at the station. No one will notice, because we can look at the tapes 10 hours later. And they almost never used the footage because they couldn't recognize the faces. And if something was deliberately done, the person had a hood or something. So it was my impression that it's not very efficient. What I don't know is if it works. I'm only interested in perceived safety. So I don't know if the perception of safety at stations go up if they see a camera, because they don't know it's a closed circuit. They think someone is watching them. But I wouldn't know, because I haven't done that survey.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer, but there is one thing in a formal sense, that if the police want to implement CCTV, another thing is a transport company, because it's easier to define it as an issue of safety. Yeah. For instance, the subway, the elevators, so they can have control. And in the subway, each train there is a camera. But I don't know if it's evaluated.
I actually know there's. Do you know? I was just. I'm sorry. You're from the. Yeah. No. Okay. Thank you.
Maybe I can for the SL. I know that they make use of it, including, for instance, the footage of this guy here was done by someone I know very. I'm closely working with the person, so I think to some extent, there is some use of the images, not only for crime purposes. We are actually working in a project to try to detect patterns of behavior in the stations to prevent suicides. So of course there is nothing to do with crime per se, but there are some kind of side effects of having a camera there. Suddenly the technology became one kind of tool for us to depict what is happening inside the station. How much of the daily image that is used, I don't know. And I know that they deleted after some time. So there is some kind of time span that they actually can save it for all purposes. So it's not there forever, but I don't know how long it is. Does anybody know? Is what I also have been informed. Marcus, do you have a...
Yes, I want to comment. It seems that our modern societies are divided between our techies and our anti-techies, where the technical people are very good at technology but don't have much sense of how to use it, and our anti-techie or non-techie people don't really like technology. And so what we really need are people in the middle who are able to use technology and understand enough about it, but know how to make human organizations use it. And we don't train at the universities, we don't train people in the middle. We train some people here and some people there. And so our issue, in the same issue applies to policing, where you have a lot of police who aren't interested in the technology. Then they find an officer who is, and they give him or her or a civilian the technical task, but then they don't listen to them really. And so you have, the problem is how to organize so that the CCTV or other technical resources are actually used by the organization in a human and organizational sense. And I don't have an answer for that, but people have to address it, and they have to know enough about each of those parts.
Could I just make a little comment? I'm not anti-tech, and I would love to join an action research project in one of our suburbs. There is probably could be a great potential, but as it's carried out now, we don't use it in a sensible way.
And I think that there is, last year when we discussed crimes in retail environments, it seems that it's very difficult to get permission to use in all sorts of places. So what I'm saying is that even if you would be able to assess properly, it's sometimes it's very hard to compare, to have sites that are comparable, just because some sites get permission for some reasons, the other they don't. I think that we have been speaking about, discussing about this before. So anyway, I would say that sometimes it's very hard to find, to understand the criteria of why certain places and groups get it and others don't.
I'd like to comment on your two questions, if it's an easy sell and if we should invest money on it, on CCTV. I come from Brazil, and the mayor of São Paulo has just announced the largest CCTV project in the history of the country, called Safe City in English. It was clearly an easy sell. We are part of Association of Surveillance Scholars in Brazil. We addressed an official request of where are the bases, and there was no response. But I found very interesting what you brought from the officer, from the responsible for the CCTV. There is one point there that is indeed true, that he says that indeed, and Professor Madison also showed that briefly, technology has evolved in terms of smart CCTV. And one of the reasons why CCTV may not work is a technological issue, because it's not, you cannot identify people and there is nothing in the software. But there is a lot going on in the software. So my question, asking about your question, is that when you say about investing 25 million, would it be effective if it's invested in these new kinds of smart CCTV, or this is also a new easy sell, because it is even more, the technological fetish is also even more present now, because you say we don't only record you, we record you in a way that you predict your movements and so on. So I would like to hear your opinion on that.
No, as I said, I would like to be interested in joining an action research project where for instance, could use these three areas and try to figure out how it works, and could it be, could we take it further? What can we get out of it? And also to try to establish routines. It's now up to the individual officer. That's not how it should be carried out. And I think the main problem is at the upper police bureaucracy, because they are so incompetent. That's the main problem.
What does the research say about preventing crime types as drug dealing in public spaces, or other types of crime that can affect the perceived safety, personal safety?
Well, I can't say more than it said in the reports that I've read. It does seem to work on sometimes property crimes, not on violent crimes. It would be interesting to see if you could try to get some kind of machine technology interaction. As Tamara said, you can use cameras because they're not so obvious to see what's going on, and maybe use that in order to make a crackdown. That would be interesting, but I don't have an answer.
Just a quick comment. So I'm from Philadelphia in the United States, and when CCTV has been effective in Philadelphia, it's when it's used by the real-time crime personnel who are using it to assist in an event that's happening, a dynamic event. What we've been unable to convince the police department to do is to integrate where the cameras are with their records management system, so that investigators automatically get a notification that footage may be available if you're going to investigate this particular crime. So they basically have to be just really proactive to figure it out. Yeah. And that kind of, we just need more systematic connections that could be enabled by technology really easily.
Thank you, Johannes, for very interesting. Well, CCTV, as I would like to make a reference to Noam Chomsky, is like when he's trying to compare the internet, the pros and cons, it's like any other tool on this planet. Take a hammer, it can be used to smash somebody's head, or it can be used as a tool in fixing your roof. It's just about, exactly like you're saying, Johannes, how you use it. So my question is more, in the Huddinge City Council, we're gonna try to produce or write the new guidelines for the upcoming camera, how the municipality will manage camera. It's a policy. So what are your thoughts? What should we bring with us?
Actually, presently, I would have to go deeper into it, and as I said, I would love to join an action research project. But then you have to be very knowledgeable about the specifics, the context, the places, what's going on, and how can you start this interaction between officers, and the what you can get out of the cameras, as Liz said. So I think there could be an interesting potential, but not in the sloppy way that it's conducted now, for sure.
Yeah, I have a comment about the evaluation. I know that there are one going on in Malmö right now from Malmö University at Seved, which is one of the most infamous open drug markets in Sweden, I would say. So unfortunately, I'm not sure when it will be published, but Bro is financing, so I should probably know, but it will be a year or so, I think.
Okay.
Will be very interesting. And the second thing is you're talking about the context, and I went to a conference that was arranged by the security corporations. It's called Safety Day of the Safety Camera or something like that. But I heard, and they talked about the Bro evaluation and stuff like that, and they were pretty critical. But there was also a researcher from, I think, Philadelphia, Eric Pisa, I think, yeah, who talked about when it works, when somebody is watching and actually something happens, there will be a response when something happens. And then I thought about SL and the cameras in the subways in Sweden, because they work very much like that. We have a TV show now in Sweden that shows how they work with this, and so I think it would be very interesting. I don't know if you know if that have been evaluated in some way, because that is kind of the example that is always shown that this is how it should work. We have a real time crime central that watches the videos, and they send out these patrols to respond and stuff like that. Do you know if it's been looked at or anything like that?
Actually, there is probably more to go into, but I've focused on city centers and not into other contexts. I'm sorry, I can't give you a proper answer.
Thanks.
Just a short comment on that. It's me and my colleague Anna-Karin Ivert at Malmö University who will perform an evaluation of the cameras at Seved.
Okay.
And we're really excited about that. It will start actually in September, and it's September now. And we have our first meeting with the local municipality police there to start planning that evaluation. And actually I'm here today to partly listen to you, Johannes, because we're doing a specific, I think Ronald Clark has been specific about that we have to look at specific types of crime when we do crime preventive efforts, and not just lumping all crimes together and say, well, CCTV works or it doesn't work. And as you said, it may have some impact on property crimes at car parks, but not on violent crime in environmental areas. And well, then we have alcohol, etc. Involved, and people not making rational deliberations, but maybe they do when they're handling drugs, etc. So it's really exciting work we are going to start with. Yeah.
Any other comments just before lunch? Do you have any comments more?
No, I think I've said what I wanted to say. I think I've been clear enough.
Is hungry, and I think we have some wraps wait for us. So I think we should stop now and so stretch our legs and eat a little bit. We'll come back later.
Okay.